I've decided to go live quickly today, and I want to talk about impulse buying, especially if you are someone who is very used to impulse buying. So you buy a lot of things, at one time, and then you realize that you're actually not happy with the purchases. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the reasons why, if you're impulse buying, trying to do something like a no spend month where you decide to just cancel all of your spending may not always work. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Veronia and I'm a money coach, and I specifically help spenders save more money. So let's talk about impulse buying versus no spend months, because I feel like sometimes we feel like if we just have a no spend month, that will stop our impulse buying. So let me just have a quick talk about what I mean by a no spend month, because I feel like there are just many, different definitions. But for me, when I hear about a no spend month, essentially what you're trying to do is you are trying to cut out any unnecessary spending. So things that just aren't essential, you will cut out. So you'll make sure that obviously you pay your bills, you'll pay your rent or your mortgage, and you'll probably pay for things like groceries, but it will literally be the bare essentials. So you wouldn't pay for anything that's like discretionary. You wouldn't be paying for anything like, going out to eat or anything like that. And I think many people think that if they do a no spend month, that will help them with their impulse buying. And the reason why I say that it doesn't always work is because of the reasons behind it. So I do want to give a disclaimer. I'm not trying to say that no spend months are 100% bad and that you shouldn't be doing it, because some people actually do no spend months for fun. Like, some people like to do no spend months. They want to challenge themselves. They want to have fun, which is great. But I think for many of us, the reason why we try and do some of these things like no spend months is because we think that it's going to help us stop impulse spending. We think that we're going to instantly stop impulse buying because we are doing things like a no spend month, and that doesn't always work. So I want to talk through why that doesn't necessarily work, especially if you are someone who does do a lot of impulse buying. I want to talk through why that doesn't work, and what you want to be doing instead if you find that you are someone who does tend to impulse buy a lot, because that used to be me. If you didn't know, I used to impulse buy quite a lot. I don't do it as much now, but I still spend money. So I do want to talk about that as well. So let me just talk about why, if you are someone who is impulse buying and you are trying to do different things, like have a no spend month, I want to talk about why that doesn't work. And one of the biggest reasons why it doesn't work is because when you do things like that, if you do a no spend month, or you just decide that I'm just not going to spend any money, what typically happens is that you end up restricting yourself completely. And then because you have restricted yourself completely, you then decide to just do the complete opposite and buy everything. So I always give this example. It's kind of like you go having a diet. So there's been times in the past where I've been like, oh, I need to go on a diet. I need to, decrease how many calories that I'm eating. So I'm literally just going to go from 0 to 100. But what's happened is that when I decide that I'm going to go on this diet, I'll be like, oh, I'm cutting out all carbs, cutting out all sugars, cutting out all of this stuff. And I feel like, oh, it's going to go great. And you may also see results. So sometimes you may find that, when you go on a diet and if you decide to cut out all of these carbs, you may start to see results in the first couple of weeks and you think that it's working. But the thing is, because you've told yourself that you're not allowed to eat that specific thing, what typically happens is that because you've told yourself you can't eat this specific thing, it's like you want it even more. And I don't know if that's just me, because when it comes to food, that's like me. If I tell myself, oh, no, I'm not allowed to have carbs. And guys, I love bread. I absolutely love bread. So if I tell myself that I'm not allowed to eat bread at all ever again, the one thing I'm going to think about is bread. Okay? Because I've tried that before and all I could think about was eating bread. bread, with anything. I absolutely love it. And the same happens with your spending. So if you tell yourself that you are going to completely cut out all of your spending and that, you know, you're not going to leave the house, you're not going to spend money on anything, what typically will happen is that you will just start thinking about it even more than before. So let's say that you are someone who, I don't know, you absolutely love to go to the coffee shop at least once a week. Like that is what you absolutely love doing. You love going to Starbucks or coffee once a week, and that is just a nice thing that you'd like to have. But then if you keep telling yourself, okay, I'm going to completely cut out all coffee trips, what tends to happen is that you will then start to think about those coffee trips, right? You'll start to think about the Costa, you'll start to think about the Starbucks, and you'll just be thinking, oh, I could really do with a Starbucks right now. And what might happen is because you continuously restricted yourself, you may get to a point where you're just like, no, I have to just spend money on Starbucks. I have to go there. And rather than going to Starbucks once a week like you used to do, you end up going 3 or 4 times a week. And that was because you simply restricted yourself in the first place. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to things like no spend months, or you decide that I'm going to completely cut out spending, sometimes that doesn't actually help, because it could make you end up spending even more money, just mainly because you've decided that you're going to completely restrict yourself. And so we just need to be careful when we're thinking about, you know, impulse buying and making impulse purchases. When it comes to like trying to just completely cut out that spending, that's not always going to help you. In fact, you may end up actually impulse buying even more. You may end up having to spend even more money than you would have been doing before. And that's simply because you decided to restrict yourself. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why I say that if you're trying to stop impulse buying, restricting yourself may not always work. Having like a completely no spend month where you decide that you're not going to spend any money at all may not always work, because it doesn't mean that you'll necessarily stop the impulse buying. In fact, you could essentially make it go worse because you've decided to restrict yourself so much. And so that's like why I would say the biggest reasons why it doesn't work. And so I want to talk about, okay, well, if I'm still impulse buying, and if I've tried to do like something like a no spend month, or I've just tried to restrict my spending and it hasn't worked, what should I be doing instead? And for me, one of the biggest things that I've realized is 2 things. So the first thing is you want to start focusing on what you actually value and start spending money there instead, and allow yourself to spend money. So what I mean by this is sometimes when we do impulse buy, many times it's just simply because either we feel like we don't have enough money, or it could be because, you know, again, we've restricted ourselves already. And so because we feel like we're not supposed to spend money, we then end up almost rebelling and decide, okay, no, I actually have to spend money. And then we end up buying a lot more things. So one of the things that you can do to stop doing that is actually start focusing on, okay, if I'm going to spend money, I at least want it to be on things that I actually enjoy. I at least want it to be on things that I actually value, because if I'm just impulse buying on just these random things and I'm not really happy about it, is that necessarily going to help me? Probably not. But if I allow myself to spend money on things that I actually care about and that I actually value, then I'm probably going to feel a lot better spending that money. Because I think one of the things that I realize is that sometimes we're just really embarrassed to spend money, and we almost think like, oh, we're not allowed to spend money, that we should be saving 100% of our paycheck every single time, when in reality, none of us do that anyway. So how about we actually just allow ourselves to spend money and be okay with that, and allow us to actually spend money on things that are more important to us. So I'll use myself as an example. And I think I've used this example so many times, but I was one of those people where I would just impulse buy on clothes. So every time I would just see clothes on sale, I'd be like, yep, it's a bargain. I'm going to buy it. But then a few weeks later, first of all, it will still just be chilling in my closet and I wouldn't have worn it at all. And then I'd be questioning myself, asking, okay, why on earth did I buy this? I don't actually want to wear this. I just bought this because it was on sale. And so that was a form of me impulse buying all the time, but not being happy with that purchase. So what I decided to do is I said to myself, okay, rather than impulse buy every time I see something on sale, how about I actually just decide to buy the clothes when I'm going to need it for a specific event or a specific occasion. And so I wasn't telling myself that I'm going to completely stop buying clothes at all and that I will just have to just, wear whatever I have for the rest of my life. I didn't tell myself that, but what I said is, okay, why don't I just spend money when I actually want to use it for something specific? And so you can see how I then started thinking about what I actually value in terms of buying clothes. And that actually helped me with my impulse spending, because I was then no longer impulse buying because things were on sale. I was then actually buying clothes because I wanted it for a specific occasion. And then if it was on sale, well, then that was just a bonus. That was great. And so you want to ask yourself, okay, am I actually focusing on things that I more so value when it comes to spending? So that's the first thing. The second thing I will say is plan for your impulse buying. Just plan for it. And I know that you might be thinking, oh, but Veronia, how are you supposed to actually plan for impulse buying? Because impulse buying is usually spontaneous, right? Like sometimes you'll see something and then you just really want to buy it. And whereas my thing is that you could still plan for that. If you know that you're the type of person that maybe sees things that you maybe haven't thought about before, like you hadn't necessarily thought, oh, I'm going to actually make that purchase, but you know that there's some things that come up where you're like, actually, no, I think I would want to make that purchase because it is something that I value. If you're that type of person, you could actually plan for that in advance. So you could tell yourself, okay, I'm going to leave a category for any spontaneous things, anything that crops up, any miscellaneous things, just to make sure I have money there so that if I do want to buy something on the impulse, but it is something that I still value and I think that will be useful for me, I can actually still do it without then having to overspend. Because I think one of the problems is that for many of us, when it comes to impulse buying, because it's such a surprise and because we haven't necessarily planned for it, we then do it and then we end up overspending. And because we then end up overspending, we're not able to save as much, or we end up dipping into our savings and then we get upset because either we weren't able to save as much or we ended up dipping into our savings. And then because we're upset, we're like, oh, well, I haven't saved money. I've struggled now. I've spent the money already. So, may as well spend the rest of the money. And then you go into that vicious cycle again, where you then spend the money, you don't save, or you dip into your savings and then you get upset. And so you spend even more money. So instead of doing that, how about we just start planning for some of those impulse purchases? Even if you don't know what you're specifically going to be buying, you can actually just set some money aside for that. And most of my clients do this all the time because they know that there are going to be things that crop up that they may want to buy. And that's okay. Again, going back to the previous point where I was saying, where are you allowing yourself to actually spend money? If you plan for it, you're not going to feel so guilty about it. If you plan for it, even if you do impulse buy sometimes, that's still going to be okay. It's not going to affect your savings. It's not going to cause you to start dipping into your savings simply because you've made a plan for some of those impulse purchases. And so even if you realize that sometimes I don't, even if you realize that sometimes I do impulse buy, I think that's still okay. Like I impulse buy sometimes too. I'm not 100% perfect. That's okay. But what I do is I will plan for it. So I tell myself, okay, if I have a feeling I'm probably going to impulse buy on something, let me just set aside money for it. Let me at least just set aside money for it so that if I do buy something and I spend that money, it's okay because I've already accounted for that spending anyway. I've already accounted for it. So I don't have to then go and use my savings, which is what I had to do before. So before I knew about, you know, how to actually save properly, what was happening was something would come up that I hadn't planned for. I would then have to go and dip into my savings because I just hadn't planned for it. And it was simply because I just didn't allow myself to spend money. I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to spend money, so I need to save it. But then if you end up spending the money anyway, would it not be better if you just accounted for it rather than thinking you're not allowed to spend money, but then you spend the money and then you end up having to dip into your savings and then you're back to square zero? You may as well at least have just accounted for it, be able to spend that money, be okay with spending that money, but know that you've also been able to have to save that money too, and you then don't have to dip into your savings either. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about when it comes to impulse buying and doing things like, you know, completely restricting your spending or having like a no spend month. Ideally, if you are doing it as something that's like a challenge, that's fun, that's fair enough. But what I'm trying to say is that things like a no spend month doesn't automatically mean it's going to cure your impulse spending. It doesn't automatically mean that, you know, you're going to completely stop impulse buying. In fact, sometimes you may end up doing it even more. And so my thing is rather than trying to completely cure it, how about we first of all almost flip the switch and start spending money on things that we actually like and allow ourselves to spend money. But also, even if you don't completely cure your impulse spending, because, you know, there's an argument whether you probably would. But even if you can't completely get rid of it, how about we just start planning for it instead? How about we just start saying, actually, no, I'm probably going to impulse spend. That's okay. How about I just account for that spending too instead, so that I can still be able to save a lot more money at the same time. So hopefully that was useful. If you do have any questions, of course, you can DM me on Instagram, or you can just, I don't know, message me wherever. And if you do want further support when it comes to being able to you know, help with your impulse spending, if that's something that you want to work on, if you are trying to save more money but you feel like you're not able to do it because of your impulse spending, that's exactly what we cover in one-on-one coaching. I've been able to help my clients not even just have to cure their impulse spending, but they still spend money, but they're able to just plan for it instead. And so they still end up saving a lot more money at the same time. So if you want to learn more about one-on-one coaching, definitely just book a call with me to find out more, either via my link in bio or in the description. And yeah, if there's any questions, do let me know. But yeah, as I've said before, I do impulse buy sometimes. It is not as much as before, because I realized that I was just spending money on a lot of useless things that I just didn't like at all anyway. And I was like, okay, well, what's the point? Because I could just spend money on things that I like instead. But even if sometimes it does happen, it's something that's already planned for anyway, so it's okay. So yeah, I hope that was useful. Again, if you've got any questions, do let me know. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you soon during another live. Bye.